Ladies and gentlemen, today we're going to talk about the rule of the square, which is a really useful pawn endgame concept that can save you a lot of time. Because if you have to calculate even such a simple position like this by going one move at a time, that takes a lot of time and is very prone to making mistakes. So there's this idea called the rule of the squares, which makes calculating pawn endgames like this one here very simple. What you have to do is the following. You basically look at your pawn, you draw the line towards the back rank, and then you draw the diagonal line towards the back rank, and you connect these two lines, and you basically make a square from that starting point. Now, it goes like this. If the opponent's king is within this square, then they can actually draw the game, and they're close enough to get to that pawn if it independently runs. Of course, if your king is in the action, then all of this is irrelevant. But if it's simply a matter of can the pawn promote independently without any other piece of support, then this is what you have to check. So for example, if this king is anywhere here, it is outside of the square, and so the pawn can push. So in this example, it is not on the square or within the square, so a5, and indeed white is one tempo quick enough to promote and win the game. Now, if from the starting position, let's say we switch the situation. Well, now, if you draw the square once again, notice the king is on or within this square, as it would be on any position here, and therefore, it is indeed close enough to stop this pawn by, again, just that one tempo. So, a very simple technique. Now, there's many different applications for this. There's a quite simple application, which could be if we just add an extra pawn for both sides. We're then going to look at a very complicated situation that I think will show you a bit more of the beauty of this technique. But just to hammer home this basic concept, let's look at this example here. In this situation, do you need to get your king into the position to support your two pawns, or can they push independently? Pause the video and take some time. So the answer is that these two pawns can definitely push independently. It's a little bit more complicated. Here's the way that you approach this. You look at this pawn, you draw its relative and related square, and you realize, oh no, the king is on the square. That means that if you just push this pawn to promotion, this king is close enough. So if you go g6, let's say they take, and if here you take back and just push this pawn on the g file, their king is too close. But then you look at your h pawn, and you realize, wait, if I draw this square instead, the king is definitely not on or in that square. And therefore, if this pawn just pushes, white can win. So what you do now is you prioritize this h pawn. So you go g6, but after they take, you go h6. And instead, it's almost as if you're just pushing the h pawn, and their king is one tempo short of stopping the pawn. And very importantly, also their pawn is far, way too far to promote. If a situation was flipped where the pawns were closer down the board and let's say the kings were way over to the side, you want to be careful, of course, about giving them a passed pawn, but here it definitely works out. Now, just to show you another move that wins, you could also start with h6, after they move, then go g6, and it'll just transpose. So, very simple example if you know the idea and you know the way to apply it, but on its surface, I think a lot of people might mess up by recapturing here, which would in fact draw instead of going h6, which would win. And that takes us to the final and most complicated example. I'd urge you to pause the video and take some time on this one. And let's go ahead and explore it. One of the important ideas or tenets of the rule of the square is that when you draw this square on the board, if the king is in that square, all that guarantees is that the king, if it goes in its fastest way possible, can stop the pawn. So one of the approaches that you can take is you can change the situation to make it so the king cannot go in its fastest way possible. And that tends to be, obviously, the hypotenuse of the triangle, so along this diagonal. So in this position, the move is d6. And the idea is that after they take, you've now placed a pawn that is obstructing the fastest way possible for this king to go. So even though the pawn, if you draw the square, the king is within that square, that doesn't matter because the exact specifics of the position mean that now black is going to try to go forward, and if they could access this d6 square, they would be able to capture the pawn, but they can't. Their own pawn is harming them. In fact, if they could take this pawn and throw it off the board, they would actually be drawing. But now, as the situation stands, they're losing because they have to waste a tempo, either going and moving their king and wrapping it around, which wastes the tempo because, again, it's no longer the fastest way down the board, or they have to move their pawn and reopen this square. But now, again, their king has wasted a tempo moving the pawn, and they can't win. So, a very nice example, something to keep in mind, the rule of the square. Don't lose hope if the king is within that square. You can try to change the situation in a very creative way, as you do here with d6, to make it so the pawn can still guarantee its safe promotion. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. Subscribe if you're new around here, like this video if you learned something new from it, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace out.